Bienvenue, Eptlasi, welcome, Kid Mirfielcha. Merci à tous les gens qui se joignent à cette conversation et je suis en descendant que j'ai largement perdu la langue à nous. C'est pendant que je parle maintenant en anglais. Thank you all for joining in this conversation, which is hosted by the Winthrop-King Institute at Florida State University. I am honored to present one facet of Post-Colonial Realms of Memory, sites and symbols in the Modern Francosphere. My focus in this presentation are the contested waters and forgotten friendships of modern Acadia, and the unspoken interplay between subsistence, sustainability, and colonialism. This is an extremely complex topic, and condensing the subject matter down to a 15-minute overview requires highly reductionary practices. I may move through content quickly, and therefore am happy to accommodate requests for transcripts in French or English. Additionally, captions, if I can figure it out, will be provided. Today, I will walk you through a very brief history of colonialism in Eastern Canada, examine treaty text and resulting legislature, celebrate successful partnerships, and acknowledge Indigenous struggles throughout the tiny blue marble we call Earth. A few notes before we begin. I am an independent researcher. This means I have no institutional agenda, but also no institutional support. This has been a labor of love. Allyship by nature is imperfect. While I'm discussing these communities from a position of solidarity, it is important to note that I personally do not represent an Indigenous community or make claims to lineal descendancy. I humbly defer to corrections or interpretations brought by those with the lived experience which I lack. Sensitive content. Some of the materials that I will present contain offensive language. As an archivist, I believe in preserving original content and context, so I offer my apology in advance. Additionally, the subject matter as a whole may be emotionally charged or triggering for some viewers. Even though reconciliation can be an uncomfortable process, we must try to move forward. Welcome to Turtle Island. This is Turtle Island, North America, our continent, and I respectfully acknowledge that the tribal support that my ancestors have received over centuries and generations, and humbly acknowledge that I'm recording today from the traditional unceded lands of the Appalachee and Muskogee Creek nations, which are down here on the turtle's right foot. The territories that I will be discussing today are up north on the turtle's right hand, the Abenaki or Dawnland region of Canada. This area is also sometimes referred to as Acadia or the Maritime Provinces. While we are disconnected by colonial maps and laws, we are connected on a macro and global level. We all share this beautiful planet together, and what we do matters. This map shows the traditional language groups of the area. The Bay of Fundy, which lies between the mainland of Canada and the Nova Scotian Peninsula, provides one of the most unique ecosystems of our continent. This is due in part to the extreme fluctuations of tidal water levels. The bounty of natural resources throughout the area encouraged traditional practices of seasonal migration and trade-based relationships. Speaking of trade-based relationships, it's time to talk about the early Francophone impact. The early 1500s were largely characterized by exploration. With increasing tension in France, many sought refuge and opportunity in the so-called New Continent. Early explorers wintered with Sagamore, Henri, and Batu through the first winter, and encountered this tradition of feasting and celebrating throughout the winter to keep one's spirits up, which inspired l'ordre de bon temps. Unfortunately, the conflict followed settlers, and throughout the 1600s, things became quite messy. While the British and French crowns and churches debated control of lands and people outside their grasp, Acadian settlers developed arable land by using abattoirs to control irrigation and establish trade networks with their Micmac neighbors. If you knew anything about Acadian history before today, it was probably this part. After many land and border disputes, Acadians were forcibly removed from the province. The map did not account for many of the family members who escaped deportation and fled overland, so I drew those guys in. Some neighboring tribal communities hosted Acadian refugees, or assisted in providing safe passage for families to reunite further along the St. Lawrence River. In Quebec, Michigan, and Louisiana, family members found their way to new homes. In particular, Louisiana's Cajuns maintained the Acadian culture with much passion. The treaties started to be signed in the 1700s. The Peace and Friendship Treaties specifically were a series of agreements between many indigenous tribes and the British colonial government. Part of the difference between these agreements in the Maritimes, as compared to others throughout Turtle Island, is that they did not include land cessions, and they laid the basis for economic colonialization, which we currently see at play. Additionally, a brief note for the 1800s, lumber and logging was a major economic force in eastern Canada and eastern Atlantic seaboard. In 1842, the Webster-Ashburton Treaty set the boundary between Maine and Canada. In practice, this was largely ignored by locals, and they continued to trade and fish as normal. And now we will get to the trigger warning offensive text, but I do want to share this original treaty text just for context in the discussion. According to the 1726 Peace and Friendship Treaty, Article 4, this indicates that indigenous populations shall not be hindered from, but will have free liberty of hunting and fishing as usual, and free liberty to bring for sale to Halifax any other settlement within the province anything they wish to sell. This treaty was enacted to ensure economic independence of the indigenous communities, as long as they were going to support British trade networks, not the French trade networks they had already established. Moving beyond the treaties into modern legislature, this has been a dispute over the past 300 years. In the past century, we have observed a number of legal and governmental decisions interpreting the peace and friendship treaties. Many of these cases were a result of indigenous people being arrested, detained, or even as victims of violence just for attempting to exercise their treaty rights. Note particularly that the concept of moderate livelihood still has yet to receive legal definition. Part of that is what has led to the current dispute. Although the Marshall decisions, quote, recognized a historical fishing right that was dispossessed from the Micmac and Maliseet communities since 1783, they may have some room for improvement in execution. In practice, this illustrates the fishery types that are recognized under the DFO, which is Canada's Department of Fisheries and Oceans. And what critics claim is that the DFO has just sought to bring indigenous fisheries under the umbrella and into the framework that they currently have. So again, moderate livelihood is a problematic term. We're not going to talk about that. Food, social, and ceremonial fisheries, which is a non-commercial, cannot be sold. However, there is no season. And the current debate centers on the communal commercial fisheries. There are 17 total treaty-based fishery operations throughout the region. 3 of these are time-limited agreements with roots in the reconciliation agreements. The tiny text here is from the original Library of Parliament infographic that I just scrunched down to fit in this aspect ratio. Although there are a number of indigenous fisheries operating throughout Nova Scotia, most of the recent conflict is occurring in one specific area. The dispute is currently concentrated here in LFA 34. In recent years, most notably 2003, there have been other occurrences at indigenous fisheries throughout the province. Note that LFA 41 is licensed exclusively to corporate giant Clearwater Seafoods, while LFA 4040 is closed for harvesting as it is protected breeding grounds. So let's boil this down for the last 5 minutes and get to the current state of conflict. What exactly is the problem? A self-managed indigenous fishery claims treaty rights allow them to operate outside of official DFO seasons in one of the most active inshore fishing areas of Nova Scotia. This chart illustrates from 2007 to 2017 total landed weight. Instead of reconciliation, the current status quo fosters conflict between indigenous fishers and small-scale non-indigenous fishers. Instead of banding together against a large corporate empire, economic colonialism, we're seeing an artificial competition rise to the point of physical violence. As we have benefited from partnerships before, it is imperative that Acadians respect the treaties that exist and continue to advocate for Indigenous sovereignty. Some Acadians are more receptive to this concept than others. In last October, on Treaty Day, Acadians Joel and Cindy Comeau met with Elder Diana Sack and offered a token of peace in celebration of Treaty Day. They were received well. It was a wonderful celebration. But before the month was over, Joel would step down as the head of the Fishermen's Union, citing his family's safety. But we know there's a better way. There is a better way forward through reconciliation and remembering. At the National Tribal Leadership's Climate Change Summit, Elder Ilarian McCurleaf reminded viewers that you can't solve the problem with the same consciousness that created it. Although complex at times, our intertwined histories attest to allyship and mutual benefit from cooperation. Many Acadians and institutions are starting to realize this. Dynamic partnerships throughout the continent are beginning to create opportunities that arise from, again, dynamic partnerships. The two-eyed seeing approach matches Indigenous knowledge holders with Western-educated scientists, engineers, researchers, etc., and encourages exchange of ideas. A frequent focus of these partnerships includes food sovereignty, which can also be linked to the struggles in Nova Scotia, although slightly out of scope and slightly tangential. There are also a number of other environmental partnerships that seek to encourage creative programming and to actually make a difference in this Indigenous sovereignty larger dispute. And one more thing that I would like to add in closing, Indigenous communities throughout the continent and even across the globe are currently experiencing an exceptional amount of grief and emotional burden. On Turtle Island in particular, many of the traumas that have been voiced over multiple generations are finally being recognized from those on the outside of the community. Some of these people include archaeologists, archivists, environmentalists, and social activists. To learn more, these two institutions are a great start.